Hello, I'm Donna Goff, the Homeschool Mommy Mentor, and I'm here to talk to you today about getting started with homeschooling or starting over if you need to. And so today we're going to talk about 6 things that you can do to rock your homeschool. These are things that you do before you get started. People talk about the time to detox or to deschool. If your children have been in school, whether it be preschool or kindergarten or regular school, if they have been in a structured uh, school academic program, it's really important to take time to do this. And what these 6 principles do is they help you shift and lay a foundation and move into a space where homeschooling can be more successful. So I have 6 points that I want to make. The first one is uh, prayerfully decide and write it down in a journal, because those feelings and impressions you have at that time will strengthen you when you hit the wall at times wondering, why am I doing this? If you really feel led to homeschooling, then reading those those impressions from your research and everything that you have had will help strengthen you in those hard times. And as you do that, take some time to envision what your children will be like as adults because they have been homeschooled by you. What kind of strengths and abilities will they have that will help them in life, in situations, in times of fear and stress and having to make decisions that might include risk? What tools will they have in their toolbox, if you will, uh, because they were homeschooled by you? Think about that. Envision each child and write it down. Write it down. Okay, the second point. So the first point is prayerfully decide and create a vision. The second point is what I call checking the pulse. Checking the pulse is not what you think. A lot of parents think, oh, I need to test my child and find where they're at and everything else. But there are some other things that you need to consider in assessing where they are. What are their strengths? What are areas that are not as strong that need to be strengthened? What do they enjoy? What inspires them? And think about that in terms of yourself and write that down, because those things are going to impact how you homeschool. The third thing I have, principle, is creating a map. A map is a master actualization plan. When you think about a roadmap, it's not just a single path to get to a certain place. It shows you the surrounding terrain. And if you hit a roadblock, you can see a way around it. And that's what this map does. And when I consider the map has a little bit more to it, and don't worry, I have blog posts on my blog that go into each one of these a little bit more in depth. And I will also do other videos in the future where I talk about each one of these principles. But when I'm talking about the map, I'm talking about things like, okay, what kind of books do you want to have in your library? Well, if you don't have space for a library, you might consider library card. And you might consider some online libraries like LibriVox and Gutenberg if your local library isn't that good. If you want to have a home library, what kind of books do you want to have in that library that are available to you and also available to your children? You might want to also consider um, preparedness, things like literacy and education. What kinds of family traditions and family ways that will help you provide literacy? For instance, in my family, I read aloud to my children. I allowed them to pick out books at the library, and I got them library cards, and they could select books at the library that interested them. But I also exposed them to great literature and wonderful vocabulary and imagery to expand their own vocabulary and their own understanding of the world. Another thing that we did for literacy is we did daily scripture study. And the Bible is written at the 12th grade level. Well, the King James is. Some of the newer versions are at lower levels. But, in times past, children were considered literate if they could read the Bible. So consider that. And what I would do was that children that could read had an opportunity to read 5 verses a turn, and we take turns going around the room as we read the scriptures. Children that didn't know how to read or were just beginning to read would sit in my lap, and I would lap read. I'd run my fingers under the words, and they would repeat after me, and soon they started making association with the printed word and everything. And we had one-on-one reading lessons when they were ready for reading lessons. And so they lived in a print-rich environment. Career planning and life mission. Part of that is leading by example as a parent. Another part of preparedness is family resource management. Nothing is better at teaching children about how to resource manage their finances than to first know the math. I mean, trying to teach them how to manage money, and they can't even figure out the math. They're not even associating the numbers. They're just going through a process. And secondly, attending family budget meeting and seeing how parents manage their money and see the kinds of decisions that we have to make and how those decisions are made and prioritized. And then, of course, when they are physically able to actually go out of our home and earn money outside our home, all of a sudden, managing that money makes a whole lot more sense. I didn't pay allowances. I did for a short time, but I got wise, and I didn't pay allowances. My children were not my employees. I told them I was not their bank. And so those things that they need and some of the things that they wanted came out of the family treasury as we had availability. And then anything else they needed to be able to work for. I wouldn't let my sons go out and mow people's lawns until they could demonstrate that they knew how to do a good job and clean up after themselves at home. And so these are some things about family ways about how children learn um, these different things before they leave my home. What about provident living skills, home production and preservation? We can together, we garden together. My children learn to sew, even my boys. What about physical health? What kind of habits and activities are you going to do and traditions in your family? We are a family of walkers, and all my boys and girls, we walk, we hike, and that was our family way of having a more active lifestyle. What about social health? I love to invite people into my home and have those opportunities for my children to socialize. And think about emotional health and spiritual health. What kinds of activities and family traditions uh, do you want to have in your home that will help prepare your children for the world that we live in? What about travel? We we put travel on our map, and we've taken some epic mom and dad's epic adventures, if you will. First one was a 12,000-mile, 6-week camping trip across the country from here to Illinois. My brother lives in Chicago, or at the time did, and all the way down to New Orleans and across the Gulf Coast, down to Key West, all the way up the West Coast to Charleston, inland to Kentucky, visiting relatives there, back through Cumberland Gap. I wanted to go through Cumberland Gap. I'd always read about it as a child, and so I wanted to see this beautiful place. And then up through Monticello uh, to Washington, D.C., Gettysburg, uh, Valley Forge, east into New York and through Connecticut and all the way up through Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. We went all the way up to Nova Scotia and Prince Edward Island. Yes, it was a big trip, but that was only one trip. Another was the Pacific Northwest, and we went through all the national parks from Yellowstone to Glacier up into Banff, Jasper National Park in Canada, and down the Pacific coast through Oregon coast and Mendocino coast and the redwoods and the whole 9 yards. And we took another trip that was the southern part and of the coast all the way up to the Bay Area. And then another trip we took was to Mesa Verde and Santa Fe and down to Las Cruces and back up through the Grand Canyon. And so travel was something. And events. What kind of events do we want to take our children to or make available to them? This isn't so much about what we're going to do to them as it is about traditions we want in our family and resources and activities we want available to them. For years, my boys were active in scouts, and my older children participated in, oh, what were they called? Classes in parliamentary procedure. And then they learned how to participate using Robert's Rules of Order to their advantage and participating in constitutional conventions and things like that so that they could learn about how our government works. Anyway, this sounds like a lot. Let me reiterate. First was prayerfully consider and create your vision. Second was check the pulse. It means evaluate where you are. And the third thing on my list was create a map. So those are some of the things that were on the map. And the next thing is lay a foundation. Now, when you go from public school, or if you don't have routines and stuff in your family, when you start to homeschool, it's really helpful to take the time to set up routines that benefit your homeschool journey. You might want to set meal times and bedtimes. One thing I suggest is an afternoon quiet time. I set mine at 90 minutes, and I told my kids, hey, you don't have to go to sleep. You can quietly play Othello or read a book or something like that, but a puzzle or whatever, but you're on your bed and you're quiet. If you start making noise and I start hearing you going kind of crazy in there, I'll reset the time. If you come out and go, is time over yet, or are we almost done? I would reset the time. It took about 2 weeks of them losing most of their afternoon because I kept on resetting the time for them to get the idea that I was serious about it. And then after that, everybody took the downtime. And what does that downtime do? Children get really cranky and oftentimes will fight and fight for attention, etc. when they are over scheduled or overstimulated. So that quiet time benefits them in a big way. It also benefits mom. 90 minutes gives me some time to work on projects I want to work on, to do things, read a book, do things that I need to do for my business. Uh, and if you have one older child that's going to be homeschooled and the younger ones are not ready for homeschooling yet, you can take 30 minutes of that time, that quiet time, and do some one-on-one with them while their siblings are having quiet time, and then they can go back and finish up their quiet time, still get an hour in, and you still have an hour to yourself. Okay, I'm trying to think of what are some of the other things on the foundation. I said meal time, bedtimes, quiet time. You want to have fun time as a family. They need to have time for socializing and civilizing, the civilizing role of playing together, playing family games, or doing wholesome recreation together. Those are some things to consider when putting together your schedule. And the next thing, let me reiterate, you have prayer and vision, write it down. You have assessing, you have your map, you have your foundation. The next thing is mom culture. Moms, you got to take care of yourselves. And really, that probably should be the first thing on your list. And I'm not talking about being selfish or taking bubble baths or whatever. I'm not saying taking a bubble bath is selfish. I'm just saying that I'm not talking about um, neglecting your kids. And I'm not talking about frivolousness, and I'm not talking about, uh, yeah, just neglecting your family. What I'm talking about here is when you get on an airplane, they tell you to put your seatbelt on, help your children with their seatbelt. And if the oxygen mask drops down, they say put that oxygen mask on yourself first before you help others. Why? Because if you lose oxygen in there, you could lose consciousness and not be able to get the oxygen masks on the others that need your help. So you put it on yourself first and then you help them. Well, the same thing is with what I call mom culture. It's taking care of you, getting up a little bit earlier, prioritizing your day, taking time to take walks or to get some exercise, the exercise you can do with your children. And I will talk about being a victory lady and things that you can do that will help organize your day on another video. But these are 6 principles I want you to consider. And after the mom culture, add to that list record keeping, and a really simple record keeping. It costs you $1 is the place where you start. And as you get a little bit more advanced and your children are more advanced, you can go to more advanced record keeping. But all you need is a composition book or a spiral notebook. And I wrote at the top the date, and then I put family, and I listed the things we did together, the read alouds, the scripture study, the general knowledge I shared with all of the children together. And then I wrote down one-on-one, and then I wrote down each child's name, what I did one-on-one with them. If we did a reading lesson, we did from this part of the lesson to this part. We used 100 easy lessons, and I didn't try to do an entire lesson in one sitting. I do from one subset to another. We might get 3 to 6 sub skills done in one day, and the next day we pick up where we left off. We started with a math that was more mastery based. It was called Math for Your First and Second Grader by Steve Slavin. Very good, very concise, very easy to learn, very clear. And my children really learned their basic math very well from this. And we just write down what lesson we did. If we practiced writing letters or penmanship, I wrote it down in the record keeping book. So really simple record keeping, not rocket science, very inexpensive. So we started out with assessing, I mean, not assessing, praying and creating that vision, writing it down, assessing where we are, mapping our journey, which is really kind of like a vision board in a book, if you will, about homeschool and family culture, mom culture or foundations, mom culture, and lastly, number 6 was record keeping. And like I said, I do have on my website uh, each one of these 6 items, and I'll go and do videos, shorter videos on each one of them uh, in the future. But this gives you an overview of where you can start. I want you to enjoy the journey. And thank you for your time today. And please subscribe and share with your friends and enjoy the journey.